Lawyers are trained to break the law. Now, I'm a lawyer. I'm also a qualified yoga instructor. Now, I might take you down a few little different paths, through some dark bits, twists and turns, but I promise you'll end up in a happy place. Now, you're probably wondering how I got to wear a label of a lawyer and the label of a yoga instructor, and they coexist happily on one human. Well, it wasn't always that easy. Back in 2012, there I was walking down the main street of Mornington with my lawyer label on, dressed in suit and leopard print heels, when those leopard print heels betrayed me, and down I went with a thud, dignity and all. There I was in the middle of the crossing, on my hands and knees, hoping those stripes would open up and swallow me whole. But alas, they didn't. So off I went to my chiropractor. He prescribed yoga for my bruised ego and knees. Yoga, I thought. That'll be like watching paint dry. I was more of a Zumba girl, but there'd be no more shaking that thing for me for a while. So dutifully I go off to my first yoga class. And what I found really surprised me. So, as any good lawyer would, I wanted evidence. Why did a few breaths and stretches make me feel so good? So what was I to do but sign up for a 12-month diploma in yoga teaching? I had nothing much else to do. Now, it was during that course my view of the world changed radically. The way I saw life was completely different. So, down the rabbit hole of research I went to a place where philosophy and science intersected, to discover that at a fundamental level, we humans are all connected. Now, I found that really difficult to bring back to my legal practice, because there I'm trained in win-lose. I'm trained in separation, in divide and conquer. So in trying to reconcile these two disciplines that I was loving, I came across a quote from Gandhi who said, "The true function of a lawyer is to unite parties riven asunder." Seems Gandhi had this idea of unity law before I did. Who'd have thought? So that led me to pose the question, are lawyers trained to break the law? The fundamental law of human connection, of unity. So I had to go and revisit law school. Now that hasn't changed for eons. We are trained to find the law and apply it to the facts. Now there's nothing untoward about that per se. So then I had to look at how we are applying the law to the facts. And in a lawyer toolkit, we have certain skills like critical thinking, rationale, analysis. Absent from the toolkit is emotional intelligence, compassion, creativity, intuition. Now, I wondered why the latter skill set was missing. So I thought for a moment, I imagined, well, people want their lawyer to stand up in court for them as towers of strength, battle ready, armour plated. They certainly don't want their lawyer looking like a puddle of tears on the courtroom floor. But that's not what emotional intelligence is about. Now, law governs relationship. Relationship with your spouse, your neighbour, the dog. And in every relationship is emotion. You can't separate it out. So what we're training effectively is a person dealing with left brain thinking to deal with problems devoid of emotion. Now, what does that look like? Well, effectively, we've got half a human dealing with half a problem. So you'll have a client, in that case, come into your office, hand over her problem on a plate and say, "Here, you take it. I can't handle it. Win for me." So now the lawyer will take the problem, take on the case, find her winning hand. The other party's lawyer will find their client's winning hand. How can you have two winning hands in a win-lose model? Recall I introduced myself as a lawyer. Did you think that was a good thing or a bad thing? Did your opinion of me change when I said I was a yoga instructor? Shakespeare's Hamlet says nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Everything is neutral. I like to upset some people by saying, life has no meaning. But then I qualify that by saying, except for the meaning that you attribute to it. This is all about perception. The way we see the world as individuals. And our perception is right for each of us. When I was about 10 years old, I was a first responder at a pony club event. And I was there to help patch up these little girls as they were being thrown off their ponies, and some of them really sustained some pretty serious injuries. And I thought, whoa, these little ponies are scary. They're scary little creatures. But these girls, despite their injuries, thought they were adorable. So here I am, I've developed this perception, ponies are scary. They've got this perception, ponies are adorable. So we've got two very valid perceptions about the one fact, the pony. Now these are conscious perceptions. These are the ones you know you have. What I want to talk about are the ones you don't know you have, the unconscious perceptions. And you all have them. You just don't know they're there. So how are they formed? Well, we're all born into tribes, families, cultures, and they all have rules. Rules we must obey to be fed, clothed, accepted, loved, to survive. Ultimately, it's about survival. Children obey rules to survive. So a classic example of how an unconscious perception could be formed is, for instance, imagine we've got a 2 or 3 year old little boy, and he's being silly as 2 or 3 year olds do. He's barreling down the hallway of his house, into the lounge room he goes, he trips, he falls, he hits his head on the coffee table. And he starts wailing. His well-meaning parent walks in and says, "Boys don't cry." Well, that little guy thinks, well, he doesn't think actually. Until he's about 7 or 8 or 9 years old, he cannot rationalise that hitting your head on a coffee table will cause you some sadness. Instead, what he's just been told is his response is not valid. His response isn't okay. And so that forms within him an internal conflict. The tribe said it wasn't okay. He thinks it's a natural response and it is okay. Internal conflict. I'd like you to remember that. So what does he do? He starts stuffing down the emotion of sadness. And every time he wants to feel sadness, every time that comes up for some airtime, he'll feel guilt and shame because he's just breaking the tribe's rules. So he says, no, stuff that down until ultimately he disconnects. He disconnects from sadness. And as he disconnects from sadness, he's forming his internal conflict. So that internal sadness is now what we call an unconscious perception, and it's formed and it's real. But he doesn't know it exists. Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung called that the human shadow. It's in the dark. And it's scary. Like ponies. So how do we find them if we don't know they're there? Well, we get out our metaphorical torch and we start looking. Where? 1, we know we have an internal conflict. We know that our response that we thought was valid is invalid. And 2, we are unable to respond effectively. Our response was, we were told our emotion was invalid, we were told our response was invalid. So we can't respond effectively. We don't trust our ability to respond anymore. We can't take responsibility for that emotion. Now, what does that look like? Well, this little guy grows up, leaves the tribe, goes out into the big wide world, forms relationships. Within those relationships, he's going to encounter sadness. And he says, whoa, that's unacceptable. But he doesn't know why. Two things have happened. One, his internal conflict is now reflecting externally into an external conflict. His internal inability to accept his own sadness has now reflected as an external inability to accept sadness. Two, because he can't trust his responses, he can't respond effectively. He can't take responsibility for how he responds, so he reacts. Sometimes in anger. And guess what? That'll lead him back into a lawyer's office. And he'll say, here, you take it, I can't handle it, win for me. So now if that lawyer takes the problem and wins for him, that lawyer has disconnected him from a solution. Yes, that client's felt validated for a moment. He's been able to blame somebody else. He didn't take responsibility. Awesome. But guess what? He walks out of the lawyer's office with his internal conflict intact. And he'll go off and do that again somewhere else. His internal conflict will reflect back at him in other relationships, and he'll repeat the pattern, and he'll be back to his unhappy place before too long. So effectively, he didn't win. He didn't win. And that's really a big deal. He didn't win. So, what can we do to turn that frown upside down? Lawyers could be first responders to your internal emotional crisis. How? We could take back your conflict, hand it back to you and say, look, in there is the solution. In there is the key to you finding your happy place. Many people said to me, well, isn't that the job for a mental health professional? And I say, yes, yes it is. But people come into a lawyer's office wanting to blame somebody else. So it's not my fault, nothing to do with me, it's them. So when we're handing a problem back to a client, we can do two things. One, show them that their external conflict reflects their internal conflict. Show them that their reaction was merely a reflection of the perception they formed in childhood. And in this case, the perception that sadness wasn't okay. And what have we done? We got out our torch and we shone a light on the dark. It can't exist. The shadow can't exist. The unconscious has now become conscious. You know you have that problem now. Issue, not a problem. It's just a shadow. It's become conscious, you can now deal with it. The second thing is you self-validate. You don't need to get anyone else to say you're okay anymore, that you're worthy. You're self-validating. Because you can go back now to childhood and say, well, my emotional response was a valid one. It was natural. The tribe said it wasn't, but it actually was. So as you're able to take back your own responsibility, you're feeling better. You can trust in your responses, and you're also owning your own emotions again. So as you're owning your sadness, you're bringing back the fuller suite of emotions, you're becoming more whole. Your internal harmony also reflects externally. You are feeling better permanently. The takeaway from all this is nobody's happy with the legal profession. The present win-lose model of separation should really be called the lose-lose model. Nobody wins. If your lawyer was trained not only as your legal counsel but also your emotional counsel, we could take your conflict and light up the path back to your happy place. Law could be a healing modality. Now that's a win-win. Thank you.